everybody. Mick here. I hope everybody's having a wonderful, beautiful day. Um, Today, we're going to start a discussion about toxic narcissism and what it looks like in behavioral settings and the etiology of this condition. This is going to finish up the dark triad, what we call the dark triad. Remember, there are three personality conditions that's intertwined with the dark triad, and they are psychopathy, sociopathy, which is one, Machiavellianism, which we did, is number two, and then number three is pathological or toxic narcissism. Now, the sociopathy and psychopathy and Machiavellianism, they're subsumed under the heading of antisocial disorder. And then today we're going to talk about narcissism or pathological narcissism, and these are referred to as what we call cluster B disorders. It's this erratic sort of dramatic countenance, and it also includes borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. So, it may be confusing, but real quickly, I want to kind of describe the structure of the 10 personality conditions that's listed in our DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for mental disorders. And this is it right here. This is our current copy. This is sort of our guidebook for diagnoses. So we have these 10, right, that are listed in here, and they fall under three different clusters, A, B, and C. Now, cluster A is known as the odd-eccentric cluster, odd and eccentric. And they are schizoid, schizotypal, and paranoid personality conditions. The second cluster, B, which we're in, of course, is known as the dramatic erratic, and they are antisocial, which I broke down into Machiavellianism, pathological narcissism, and then, of course, psychopathy, sociopathy, that's combined there. So I clumped these three together under what's called the antisocial condition. Now, the second condition is of course, narcissism, which we're talking about today. And then there's the third, which is borderline personality disorder, and then lastly, histrionic. Then we have what's known as the cluster C, this anxious, fearful, and they include dependent personality condition, avoidant personality condition, and lastly, OCPD, which is totally different than OCD. So OCPD, all right, obsessive compulsive personality disorder in that. So the plan is to blog about all the PCs over the next several weeks, depending on my work and the fishing schedule that I have. So we're going to try to get through all 10 of them. Some people have asked me, why it is important to know about a person's personality. Let's say if you're treating them for depression or anxiety, maybe an adjustment disorder, or even a paraphilic disorder, okay? Well, it really helps to set up two very important aspects of therapy organization. This is organizing the therapy. And those two important aspects are called case conceptualization and treatment planning, okay? So just don't think that, hey, these therapists are out there shooting from the hip. They actually set up, they case conceptualize, and then we'll write up a treatment plan. We also write up our case conceptualizations. So, the reason we do this, let's say someone comes in for, let's say with social anxiety, okay, where they get really anxious around people or, being in or being the center of attention. Perhaps they got a big presentation coming up at work, and they have massive stage fright, okay, which is a freezing condition from overactivation of the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is form of social anxiety, Excuse me. If I'm going to case conceptualize correctly, then I would need to know if they had a personality condition like histrionic, this overly dramatic personality disorder where they are emotionally dysregulated. So I need to do that correctly to case conceptualize and to treat them. Or, hey, how about this? What if they suffer from a paranoid personality disorder and they've got to give some sort of presentation? Can you imagine a paranoid on? I don't mean to say a paranoid, but somebody with paranoid disorder on stage. They're going to be like, hey, what are you guys looking at? So, what's everybody staring at here? So you can just imagine these complications of both, in case conceptualization and treatment planning. So that's why, we like to do that. It changes the background in those treatment approaches. Now, the old DSM-4R, which is this one here, I've got a copy of it right here, and it has these axes. They've got 5 axes, and axis 2 talked about personality disorders. So you had to include that in your assessment within the case conceptualizations, and and the treatment plans. But in the 5 here, it's changed all that. So you necessarily don't have to go through those axes. And what's funny was several years back, because the 5 came out in 2013. I was reading and comparing all the changes between the 2 versions. And, they made up task force for each sort of section, okay? And the task force for the personality conditions, they didn't want to include narcissistic personality disorder in the new edition, in the 5. But the narcissists within the task force, they sternly objected because, they couldn't stand the idea of no longer being recognized with this sacrosanct book of psychology and psychiatry. So whether that was a joke or not, I thought it was kind of amusing. So, okay. So now, on to the tripartite, the last one, narcissistic personality disorder, the last of the dark triad here. And it's, you'll hear it as pathological narcissism, or what I like to call just basically toxic narcissism. Okay. As always, I will remind the listeners that besides the direct criteria, I think there's 9 of them for narcissism listed under each condition, these specific symptoms. There are 6 general criteria, I think, which requires to discuss, and I'll cover these in every single one, and you'll probably be able to recite them like me off the top of your head. So the 6 general criteria for a PD to exist. First, the condition must be markedly different from the normal behavior that is accepted in society or in cultural norms. Okay, so an example is, let's say, an overly flatulent person is in public, and to me, that it's funny, I guess, unless you're around him or her, but that can indicate what we call a schizotypal behavior. It's in that respect. Number two, the second personality condition uh, from the 10 that I listed above, remember, out of the three clusters. The second condition, uh, it must cause extreme distress in relationships or in occupational or other social environments. It's pretty easy to remember. Third, the condition must remain pervasive and consistent across all different domains and throughout time periods. That's easy for me because that's sort of what we say is the definition for personality. It's pervasive and it remains constant. And it includes basically all scenarios and situations. Okay. Number four, we must be able to trace this condition back to childhood or to adolescence. um, so an example would be is if an individual, a young lad or lady is diagnosed with conduct disorder in earlier years, in their earlier years, when they're a child or an adolescent, it'll meet the criteria for antisocial diagnosis later on when they become an adult, okay? Because that's one of the criteria for antisocial. Number five, which goes along with number four, the condition cannot be better explained with a behavioral disorder such as bipolar or unipolar mania. That's not in the five, but we're seeing that just somebody that presents just with mania alone. We call it unipolar mania. Or let's say they have a trauma-based disorder, which we could diagnose, so they can't have that. So, and those typically, they're not as enduring or as lifelong as personality conditions. And then the last one, the personality condition cannot be associated with a substance or some external perturbation, like lead poisoning or some sort of toxic chemical ingestion. Okay, so that's it's something that's perturbed it. Now, which is interesting here, we're going to go back a little bit. I always like doing a little history and background. So, the word narcissism comes actually from Greek mythology. It was a character named Narcissus was his name, and he was a hunter who was known for his beauty. Okay, according to Oron, he rejected all of these romantic advances, and eventually falling in love with himself and his own reflection of a pool of water. And he stared at it incessantly, and later he died. And in his place sprouted a flower, bearing his name. So the character of Narcissus is the origin of the term narcissism. Okay, it's a fixation with oneself. Now, a healthy dose of narcissism, we should possess that. We need to be able to focus, on self-need and individual aspirations that, feed and complement our inner self or inner self-esteem or self-concept. This is healthy, harmonious balance of self and others. It becomes pathological when self becomes a greater force, okay? Just this a more expansive way of relating with the world, which is self-oriented and above the genuine needs and wants of others. Basically, we become number one, number two, number three in pecking order, okay? So that's what the narcissist basically is. He or she, they're number one, number two, and number three, okay? There are two types of maladaptive toxic narcissism that are recognized within the clinical world, and that is grandiose, which is heard a lot, NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and vulnerable NPD. Now, I know I call them disorders or conditions. because there are disorders in our text and our book, but I use condition, and I explained that a long time back. Why I feel it is that way, but only grandiose is mentioned, in the five here. But yes, I truly believe there are these two different types. Okay, there are grandiose and vulnerable, and these branches from the narcissistic personality disorder. And I've treated patients exhibiting these conditions of both grandiose and vulnerable. I will say treating clients with cluster B conditions. You remember, antisocial, we're on narcissism now, and histrionic and borderline. Those I think are the most intractable as compared with the others. Well, except for maybe OCPD and schizotypal. Those are very difficult. And with any PC clients, they almost have no clue they exhibit these traits and automatic behaviors. So there's no clue for them. We call it egocentric, uh, and at times therapy can be almost insufferable and I'd say kind of agonizing, for both the client and the therapist. So, grandiose MPD, what does it look like? The severe behaviors, they're easy to recognize. Okay, so if it's severe, it's very easy to recognize, but we're going to talk about some things that are less available to knowledge or to the eye, when you're around people. But the most severe ones, they tend to be bombastic. I want to say they're interruptive, okay? They're intrusive, and of course, they're self-centered. Um, they crave the limelight, the accolades, and and the praise that goes along with being the center of attention. So we have a barge going down river, so kind of eyeing that a little bit. So let's, like I said, we're going a little bit deeper at what it may look like at a level that's not so recognizable. But before I do that, I want to stress this is really important. I made a note of it, and I hadn't said it yet, and I need to say this. Those with MPD, they have this sort of fantastical or this fantasy and fabulation. It's a huge part of their psyche. Okay, so please remember that this fantastical, fantasy-oriented, almost like a fabulist. They're making up stories. That's part of their psyches. They're daydreaming. They don't live in reality. They at times, most often than not, create and fabricate stories of vacations, accomplishments, or possessions. Um, anything that serves their fragmented ego. So this is the basis of MPD. Like I said, they're egocentric. They do not realize nor care to even explore their psychopathic or psychopathologic personality. It's alien to the thought or emotional process. Okay. All right. Moving along. Moving along. What we may notice as a person with MPD is they play this card of what I call one-upmanship. That is, no matter what someone has done or what they own, that person with MPD, they have something better or greater. You know, this one-upmanship. Now, on the other hand, if they can't beat someone out, uh, they will diminish or devalue the other's accomplishments or achievements. Now just think about that for a minute. We have somebody with one-upmanship, okay? They're always telling the better story, or they've been there, or if they can't outdo them, then they're going to have this complete deflation of another's accomplishments. So, that's where the fantasy and the fabulation comes in. Because it could be half true or some true or just totally false. So, okay, so I'm going to read. It's the best for me to read the criteria here out of the DSM-5. I got it marked here. Come on, baby. There you go. Narcissistic personality disorder, page 669. Okay. Now, like I said, there are 9 subcriteria. Okay, but I want to read here. So, it's a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior. There's a need for admiration, a lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood, and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. Okay, so there's 9. So we look at if they have 5 or more, they meet clinical diagnostic criteria. Number 1, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. Okay, they exaggerate their talents in order to be recognized as superior, without the commensurate achievements. Hubristic comes to mind to me, boastful or even pretentious. Okay, they always seem to want the best, or they have the best, or they pretend to have the best. I think these people, they'll be in extreme debt, beyond their financial means, because they want to maintain or look like they have these things. Okay. Number 2 is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Okay. Vanity comes to mind in this for me. They tend to daydream about being a superstar and having this unlimited fame and fortune, which comes with admiration from the populace, like I said. And so brilliance. I'm going to talk about brilliance a little bit later, I think, with these fantasies, okay? Number 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions. Okay. So this brilliance, they may appear like, they hang out with all these people like in college, I see this a lot, I'm from this institution and I have this pedigree and those things, which is great, and I welcome that. But when you over promote it, and some people do, that you constantly, if you're around them, you hear it over and over. So not only are they this self-fabulous, but they'll also exaggerate and embellish or completely fabricate the status or positive attributes of others they associate with. So if they can't, make something up about themselves, they're going to make up something about those that they hang around, who they associate with. I think we can, if we go back, we can recognize this behavior in the earlier ages, especially around 5 and 13 years old. Okay, these young kiddos, they'll tell whoppers, or they'll spin these tall tales that an adult knows to be made up. And I think this is a developmental indicator for future NPD diagnosis. Okay, number 4, requires excessive admiration. Class clown comes to mind, or the cut up, where they want to be admired or noticed to the point of disruption. This this will indicate their self-esteem is almost invariably fragile, and it takes the form of a need for constant attention in this. The one that's always, remember I said interruptive? You know, they could be interruptive away so they get the attention. Okay? They covet these compliments as to being like super funny, especially witty and bright, or they'll expect others to positively comment on their possessions, what they got, their appearance, their adept mannerisms. And if these things aren't forthcoming from others, they'll broach the subject of admiration, and they'll elicit this required attention and admiration. So, number 5, has a sense of entitlement, i.e., unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. Okay? They'll cut in front of others, things like that. They'll go when it's not their turn. They think somehow they're special in that. I think one I see a lot is people who jump into a parking spot another person was getting ready to take. Full well, knowing what they're doing, but they don't care. So, number 6, they are interpersonally exploitative. So, interpersonally exploitative, what does this mean? Interpersonally means you use others, okay? Their wants and needs are the priority, and they expect assistance or favorable regard. They'll come to others for favors, but not return the gesture. Okay, the ones who ask for help with moving. That's a good one there, or with these big projects. But when it comes time to return the favor, they are emphatically, not there. They're not available. So, and all that. So, yeah, all you hear is crickets sometimes, right? They won't answer your text or your phone calls in that. So, all right, number 7. Lacks empathy. Is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. I'm going to call this marginal empathy or situational empathy. Okay, so lacks normal empathy. They have an overarching need. I'm going to give you an example here. It comes to mind. They have this overarching need to discuss their own issues or concerns in an inappropriate or lengthy detail. We've seen that, right? Again, it kind of goes back to one-upmanship a little bit. They're interruptive, and you're trying to tell somebody something, and they interrupt, and theirs is, they've got a worse medical condition or things of that nature, and it ignores others' needs or concerns. So, what we'll see is contemptuous and impatient behavior with others, who talk about themselves if they can't stand it. So they're just oblivious. They're oblivious to the hurt their remarks or actions can cause to others. When we relate to someone with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, there's an emotional coldness. Remember, it's not normal. This empathy is not normal. Or you may even seen this disingenuous, this unctuous sort of feint to intimacy. They may start out romantic relationship, showing a lot of attention, but then again, it changes, and and all focus is on them, and it's for some it's crickets, in these relationships, on the other side, and have that avoidant. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Okay, I want to get ahead of myself. Now, number eight, often envious of others, or believes that others are envious of him or her. Again, getting back to fantasy. They have this fantasy that others are jealous of them, or if someone appears better off, what they're going to do is they're going to assign this cheating, or this person they cut corners, or others, they're the recipient of others' help. Like, they're well off because of inheritance or lucky fortune. See, they diminish and devalue others' accomplishments if they can't have that one-upmanship, if they're not ahead. Oh, that was slick. All right, I'm about done with this anyway. Number 9, I spilled it all over my book here. Shows arrogant, haughty behaviors and or attitudes. So I got to set this off to the side here. Cavalier comes to mind for me in this, this haughty sort of way of being. And this is where, the denigrating or the condescension to others comes into focus, right? I guess we can describe them sometimes as snobbish, disdainful, patronizing for sure, right? Or just downright rude. They may comment to another. I'm talking about gossip here. They may comment to another associate of the negative aspects of others, right? So they're this habitual gossiper. If they can't do better, then they're going to devalue and denigrate on this. And you know what? Also, to add to number 9 here, I think it's really important, is we'll very seldom hear a person with MPD say that, I'm sorry. We won't hear that comment, I'm sorry. This is not in their vocabulary. Because you got to remember, their self-esteem is fragile. And any indication of being called out or any criticism is taken out of context, okay? And this could leave these individuals feeling humiliated, degraded, hollow, and empty, okay? There are some higher suicide rates for those diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Okay. So I'll just leave it at that. I didn't really prepare for that, but that came to mind. I couldn't give you I want to say it's in here. I can look it up, but my pages are all wet. We've been talking about the grandiose, and now I want to talk about the vulnerable, the vulnerable narcissist. Okay, and like I said, you won't find that in the 5, but I've treated the vulnerable narcissist and both grandiose. But the vulnerable, he or she will present as shy, this look of being vulnerable. They'll present, right, shy, insecure, and they are shame-ridden. Now, fantasy is also a foundation for this subtype. But instead of in-your-face arrogance, it's overwhelming pity. Pity for their situation, pity for their life, or any other avenue where they can elicit pity from others. Women, tend to be more oriented to this group. And I've seen what is known as what we call Munchausen by proxy, okay? Where a mother or another either fabricates or produces this ill health or this disadvantage in another person, their offspring maybe, could be a spouse, in order to gain the attention and pity of others. It's this fabricated pity scenario. Now, the infamous Munchen, okay, he was an infamous character. It was right after the Crimean War, who would go to these British taverns pretending to be this decorated British soldier during the Crimean War. Today we call it stolen valor. But a parent, a spouse, and could the mother, the wife, the husband, a caregiver, they will they'll highly exaggerate the ill health of the child, or even I've seen it to where they'll produce these deleterious symptoms to make the child actually sick. So Munchausen by proxy, is what that's called. Uh, you know, so if they can't do it by proxy, they'll feign injury or illness themselves and tell everybody within their circle and talk to them, who will listen. So I think this is where vulnerable narcissism, it kind of crosses over in the realm of histrionic disorder. If I could draw circles, all these think of something like the Olympic circles. They all intertwine. So these symptoms will overlap with each other. So I think this is where it overlaps with in the realm of histrionic disorder, which is this dramatic state of crises after crises, right? Now the sad part is it becomes this cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy where they unwittingly or subconsciously, they make their lives this roiling sort of roller coaster ride of dramatic interludes. And I'm sure we all know people like that, or we've been around people like that. So, but deep down, they all want to be admired for their ability to weather these self-fabricated issues, and be acknowledged for being such a stalwart rock of strength. When in true fashion, they're just really like sandstone or chalk. So these bad things, they keep just happening over and over. and they don't realize it's because of their mental instability. Remember? I told you they're egocentric. They don't realize they're this way. So they're just like this lightning rod for dysfunctional occurrence, all right? So another way to sort of tell if somebody has these narcissistic traits is if they lose friends or acquaintances rather quickly. And I think a big thing is what I ask is, tell me list 5 friends who are lifelong friends, right? So they're characterized by really no lifelong friendships. And when I say friends, you can't include cousins or family. So that's something I always want to know. Even these romantic relationships, they end with the other exasperated, almost worn out by the experience. Okay. I want you to remember this here. I want you to remember what is known as a rule of 3. Okay, the rule of 3. If someone does not do what they say, or if you feel like you're being used or manipulated for the 3rd time, right? Move on. Move on. The first 2 times we can chalk it up to extenuating circumstances, but the 3rd is a pattern, okay? And also, too, I want to say, someone who plays that pity card on a regular basis, let's just move on, okay? So the rule of 3, right? All right, etiology. So, etiology of NPD. Where did it come from? Or what causes this personality disruption? I think what what causes it is brain and circuit formation of overly sensitive cortical regions. Okay, and the where is in early childhood to adolescent development periods. So these times we'll see promotion of neglect, abuse, emotional dysregulation, and yeah, even an overly pampering and excessive rewarding parental approach to raising a child. Okay. Now these are both polar extremes in a household environment, but they can produce the same thing, and that is an adult who is self-absorbed. Okay. Now I don't want to go in too deep to the neurochemical imbalance that is experienced with NPD, but let's just suffice to say that the reward pathway is called the striatum, and its dopaminergic release is a little off. Uh, the serotonergic cascades, it affects our mood. Those are off. The endogenous opiate system, right? And oxytocin is dysregulated and out of whack. So, uh, you know, I professionally feel that I'm gonna tell you a story. I had a client, and she's married in her mid-30s, and she had a child. And I wasn't treating her for this one thing I was telling you about, but it came up. She told me that she just didn't have when she looked at everybody else with her children and how they reacted and saw the facial expressions and that bonding, as you can see, that sort of that extra that a parent has with a child. She says that she just she couldn't feel that. Now I knew her developmental story, her trajectory, and I felt like the oxytocin and the endogenous opiate system, along with the serotonergic and dopaminergic systems, didn't develop correctly, okay? And that's what happens in development. When you're going through, your brain will wire up, and it stays with you for adulthood, okay? So I think those with MPD, I think they have a better chance of diminishing their PD compared to either psychopathy or Machiavellianism, what I talked about earlier. So, this is not so much brain structure as it is brain function. And it's clinically proven that what we call synaptogenesis and synaptoplasticity, can occur during adulthood, during therapy, helping to change behavior. Okay. Now our gray matter will not change. Okay, except for aging. A process is, what we call apoptosis, apoptosis, ap, ap, apoptosis. Excuse me. It's been a while since I said that word. But the connections of the neurons, right? The synapses where they come together. View it like this: in between, the space in between the neurons. What we call the axon as it comes down, and we have presynaptic and postsynaptic here. These can change. So that's where we get the plasticity from. So in a nutshell, the sensitive nature of the firing of the neurons can be reduced. Okay, that's what we call, when something's sensitive, it's overly regulated, overly dysregulated, and habituation is where there's a decrease. But this overfiring of neurons can be reduced, or if needed, the increased we can increase the activation of certain synapses can be upregulated. Okay, so I didn't want to get too much into that, but we're going to talk about what it looks like in this developmental period here, what it really looks like at the attachment between child and caregiver, and it's namely the mother. Okay, but we're not putting the onus on the mom. Fathers are responsible also. And I talked about it in a vlog a while back about fatherhood. But when it comes to attachment, I put two vlogs up on adult attachment. And, hopefully you can remember that, hopefully I can remember, but there are 4 types of adult attachment, okay? So there are 4 types, but they're under 2 banners. The first is secure, all right? Now, about 40% of the adults, 45% today, they're considered securely attached, right? And the rest is what we call insecure, about 60%. Now, under insecure, there are 3. There are 3 types. The first is what we call anxious preoccupied attachment. I think this is seen more in the vulnerable presentation of NPD, where that person comes from an anxious, preoccupied attachment for the vulnerable narcissism. The next one is what we call avoidant, dismissive avoidant, okay? And then we have fearful avoidant. I had to come back real quick. Dismissive avoidant is, it's just that, right? There's no interest in their mate outside of their own needs. Kind of the cricket sort of deal I talked about. And then the fearful avoidant is their mate. Their mate is their source of fear, believe it or not. It's kind of hard to understand, but because when they were young, when I say young, about 3 to 2 years to 0, and from the neonate up to about 3 years, development and what the brain is doing is just, it's growing in size exponentially, about 20% in the first 2 years, okay? It grows. So when we're talking about fearful avoidant here, their safety zone, right? The parent. It's a source of comfort, but it's also a source of fear, okay? So the person that child needs to go to, they see him as comfort, but they also fear him. And, they'll carry that over into adulthood. And I think a lot of times with that, we'll see a gregarious type of display for MPD. These don't always hold true in all cases. Just the preponderance of attachment types, I think. Now, I've probably read it somewhere. It's probably why. I don't know if I've ever had an original thought or not. But I think the preponderance of attachment types fit these presentations of NPD, okay? So in that, the fearful avoidant is, you'll see gregarious. And then what we call the other one, the overly preoccupied attachment, we'll see invulnerable, okay? So ambivalent preoccupied. What occurs in these insecure attachments is, and I've talked about it, is toxic shame, okay? Toxic shame. It becomes internalized. And instead of receding in their shell, so to speak, they have this opposite reaction of overcompensation in the gregarious. Into the, hey, look at me, hey everybody, look at me. So this is what we see. So the etiology, like I said, is what does it come from? It comes from brain development, these overly sensitive or unduly sensitive areas in the brain. But now, the gray matter is no different than everybody. It's just how the function of it, okay? So the structure isn't necessarily different. It's just a function, as with synaptogenesis and the synapses working. Okay, and that. Now that's it. I mean, that's all I can pretty much think of. That's all I have in my notes on the dark triad. So we covered psychopathy, sociopathy, Machiavellism, and narcissism. Now, on the next one, I'm going to cover histrionic and borderline. So this cluster B is what we would call toxic people, but I'm not sure that I'm going to next one to do that, to do the histrionic and borderline. What I may do is I've had some questions about good and evil, you know, and to talk about evil. So that'll be kind of a 20-minute one. It won't be so bad. So that's probably what I'm going to do next time. But, as always, if you have questions, hey, look, shoot them to me. I'm here. God bless you. I hope you have a great day, a great week. And if there's anything I can do, you can email me at agapecounselor at outlook.com, agapecounselor at outlook.com. Okay? All right. As always, God bless, and I love you. See you next time.